Hello friends, nice to be here with you. Today we are going to talk about Ruby on Rails Frontend. So you can first of all find me in the socials, Twitter, LinkedIn. Originally I am from Ukraine, from the north of Ukraine. That's the sad part. The happy part, I recently became a father. And you might know me from SuperRails YouTube channel. So over the last 4 years I've recorded like around 200 short Ruby on Rails videos about how to do different cool stuff. And I have also recorded a lot of videos about using Stimulus.js, about Hotwire, so about the topics that are dear to Marco's heart. And I gave a talk a year ago about Hotwire cookbook, so common patterns, common use cases for different Hotwire implementations. But today we are not going to focus on Hotwire, we are going to focus on other parts of Ruby on Rails frontend. Now, before, with Ruby on Rails 6, we used to use a Webpacker, we had .js.erb format, we used RailsUI, we also commonly used jQuery, and I would say it was not the best era of Ruby on Rails, and I think that's when the meme "Is Ruby on Rails dead?" was especially relevant. So I call these Rails 6 dark ages. And it is the age when React became popular, and most Ruby on Rails developers that I know became backend developers, building just Ruby on Rails in the backend, serving APIs, and using like React for the frontend. For example, we've got Meister here that uses Ruby on Rails for the backend. They're like one of the sponsors, and React in the frontend. Yeah. So these were the dark ages. But now we have Ruby on Rails 7, and I really call it the renaissance of Rails, but especially the renaissance of the Rails frontend, because the backend has stayed really more or less the same, but we have much better and many more tools to write nice frontends, maintainable frontends with Ruby on Rails. So instead of Webpacker, we have input maps or ESBuild. ZestUI was, I would say, rebranded and improved with TurboStream format. Instead of RailsUI, we have TurboDrive, and instead of TurboLinks, and TurboDrive has better documentation, and it's kind of a bit easier to use. Instead of jQuery, you can use Stimulus.js. And is Rails frontend changing between Rails 7 and Rails 8? I would say no real change. So if in Rails 7 you would be using SP rockets, in Rails 8 you would be using PropShaft for assets, but it's more or less the same. No big change in your usual workflow. So now I really enjoy working the Ruby on Rails frontend. It's a pleasant experience to develop, to create reactive components. And yeah, we are going to talk about a few patterns, a few common things you would usually need to do when creating a new Ruby on Rails application and doing the frontend for it. So any Ruby on Rails app starts with Rails new, and you have a few options. So you can select the CSS framework, you can select the way you're going to serve JavaScript, you can select the assets for CSS. Before, like 5 years ago, I would always go with Bootstrap, and most of the companies I worked with all used Bootstrap. Nowadays, I don't see any, well, I haven't worked with any projects that started in the last like 3 or 4 years that were not using Tailwind. There's also an option to install Bulma, for example, but I've never seen a non-hobby project on Bulma. Maybe it's just me. So Tailwind is like, I would say, the gold standard of writing CSS in our time. As for JavaScript, there are, I would say, two main options. It's input maps or ESBuild. Input maps is the default, and I would usually go with input maps if I don't need to import a lot of external JavaScript packages, if I don't need to import JavaScript packages that also have their own CSS. But if you go with ESBuild, you will definitely not regret it. And ESBuild is perfect if you like import heavy JavaScript packages that have a lot of their own CSS. For example, like JavaScript calendars. Okay, so let's create a new Ruby on Rails application. We are going to use Tailwind. Hooray! We can generate a few pages for our application. Yeah, actually, now we can generate authentication for Ruby on Rails, so you don't need the device for simple applications. You can just you can just use the built-in Rails authentication, but you have to be using the main Rails branch because it is still not released in Rails 7.2. Okay, so we have generated a new application, a few pages, and we see this empty application. But we need to make it look normal, navigate between all those pages, so we need to add some navigation. And let's have a look at how different popular websites approach navigation, the layout of their application, because I think you should always start with the layout. Let's have a look. So here we have LinkedIn, we have a navbar, a sidebar, and the main content. We have a sticky navbar, you scroll, it stays on top, a fixed sidebar, and the scrollable main content. Twitter is the same, and Slack is the same, and ChatGPT is the same, and Microsoft Teams is the same. So it looks like it's more or less the gold standard for layouts in applications these days. So a navbar, a sidebar, and a main content. But you should not only think about desktop, because most of the users these days are from mobile. Yes, you've all got laptops, but people who do the sales in business, people who are in underdeveloped countries, they might be using mobile mostly. And there's more mobile traffic than desktop traffic now. So you should also always think of how is your website going to look on mobile. Let's have a look at how the mobile version of the websites look. Now, this is not the LinkedIn app. This is just LinkedIn opened in a browser. And you know what? It looks like an app. We have a nice header, we have the main content, we have the footer. Same with Twitter. It's not an app that you download and install, but it looks like an app. Same with Instagram. So you have a header, a main content, a footer. And here are a couple of examples of what I have built. So the first is Twitter, second is an application that I have built. Both look more or less like an app, but it's just responsive design. Same here, LinkedIn and an app that I have built. Talking of drop-down menus, it is common when you build a website with a navbar to show the links on a small screen in a drop-down menu, as MDN docs do. But no big apps have this UI design, and I think it's much cooler to have a navbar, footer, buttons than a drop-down that feels like it's a website but not a web application. So, okay, there are two design patterns that we have just noticed for desktop and for mobile. How do we build this? So here we have what we start with, and yeah, one important thing. So commandment number one, build responsive design and start from layout. If you want to make your application responsive, if you want to make it look good on desktop and mobile, there's no point in making the elements inside the main area, the part that you yield responsive, if you don't make the layout itself responsive. So yeah, here is an example of a responsive layout that I have built. It looks good on desktop. I make it smaller, it looks good on mobile. And here is the initial code that is generated when you create a new Ruby on Rails application with Tailwind. And here is a basic example of code that you can use for having this specific pattern of navbar, sidebar on desktop and navbar and footer on mobile. So feel free to use it, and it would look more or less like this. So here is the desktop layout, here is the mobile layout. So this is basic minimal CSS that you would need for this. Okay, we are done with layout design. And talking of Tailwind, if I was starting to learn Tailwind now, first of all, I would figure out not different colors or different fonts, but first of all, how do you place the content on a page? First of all, you figure out flex, grid, and then different viewports. So on the normal screen, you have text base. On the wide screen, you have bigger text. So this is 101, how to start learning Tailwind. Okay, so we have built the sidebar, we built the header, and we have the main content. And now we're going to focus on like the main content, the part that you yield in your application. So here is like a few slides from an application I built. We have the sidebar, we have the main content. And you see, the main content has something common on all the pages. We have a title, a subtitle, and possibly we have a few buttons. So this is like the main content. And I noticed that in most applications that I work with, I always create a page component. It's usually a view component where I can pass a title as a string, a subtitle as a string, I can pass a block of actions, and then I have the yield. And I also pass the paddings. So the page component, and often I would want the page component to be not full width, but centered. So it would have an option full width, true or false. And this is like a minimal code for this page component using view components. Then any Rails application would go with Flash messages. So if you are not using Ruby on Rails, maybe you would want to use some kind of a JavaScript library for Flash messages. I myself, some time ago, before the Rails 7, would use this Toaster.js library, but these days you don't need it for Ruby on Rails. Just with a tiny bit of code, you can make Flash messages automatically dismiss. You can click on the Flash message to dismiss. So yeah, this is like the code for having Flash messages. And again, I have a Flash component. I don't put it in the helper because this logic is used only in the Flash. So like if a notice, it is blue. If it is an alert, then it is red. And a dedicated stimulus controller. On connection, it removes the Flash message after 5 seconds. But if you click it, it removes it right away. Yeah, so Flash messages. Another thing that you would usually want to do in an application is a helper for active link to. So highlight link to current page. Here's an example in the sidebar. Here's an example on the mobile footer. There exists a gem that is also named active link to, but maybe you don't need to have an additional dependency. This is more or less all the code you need to have the implementation of active link to that would work inline and also with a block. And here, when you do your helpers, don't also forget to write helper tests. It will always be beneficial to have a small test. And if you're using like GitHub Copilot or something like this, it can write tests for components faster. And also I recorded, it's not very visible behind me, but a video about how to create this and the logic behind it. Okay, so buttons. Now this is really interesting. So some time ago, Alessandro Rodi asked a very interesting question on Twitter. What is the best approach to have maintainable buttons CSS using Tailwind? And there were a few different answers. Also the creator of Tailwind CSS answered. And if you look at the website of Tailwind CSS, how they propose you to like have same CSS in different places, their proposition is use your IDE and like edit everywhere at the same time. So here's the example, like you have a few links, but if you're like, I don't know, hard coding something, what if you have like PX and PY in a reverse order? It will already not work. So I don't like this approach, and also Tailwind CSS website suggests you not to abstract CSS with apply because it kind of defines the point of Tailwind. But I don't agree with this. I don't like this approach proposed by the official Tailwind docs. Also, a very bad thing that I have experienced in applications I've worked with, people trying to abstract buttons into a separate component. So you would have like button component with a lot of different options. Usually, it's not easy to use and hard to get onboarded and hard to maintain. Why reinvent the wheel if Bootstrap has the perfect API for buttons? You have a button class, you have button color, you can have like button disabled or so on. And you can easily with just a few lines of code implement the same buttons API as you have in Bootstrap in your Ruby on Rails application. And now when you want to change button secondary, you will change it everywhere in your application. So I think sometimes using apply and abstracting tailwind is very beneficial. Other simple cases where I would abstract tailwind would be like for input fields or for like nav links. And yeah, if there is like one thing I want you to know about tailwind today is it is okay to abstract tailwind, and you don't have to follow all the arbitrary rules somebody sets. Okay, so we had a few examples of different front-end abstractions. We had tailwind abstractions into like buttons, for example. We had this active link to that is a Rails helper, and we had like a page component or flash component that we used view components for. So you see, there's a few strategies, and you don't have to use only one. You have to use like the one that best fits the specific use case. In terms of complexity, or in terms of like how much code is involved, CSS abstraction is the easiest. Then you have like this active link to, where you can also have like some Ruby conditionals, like if this is current page, if this is current user, and so on. And these are like full components that have a Ruby file and an HTML file that go together. So you don't have to use like only components. It's okay to use helpers. It's okay to use CSS abstractions. Then Stimulus.js. I did not like JavaScript. I did not like JavaScript development before Stimulus.js, but Stimulus really feels nice to me because it lets you have like small components that it's just like some JavaScript and some HTML, and it's really, I don't know the word. Yeah, it's like a component in itself. So here is a simple example of tabs, like how would you do it? You could do, I don't know, inline script. You could, okay, no, never mind. Yeah, another example of using stimulus is form previews. So here I'm typing, here I have the result rendered. I could use like turbo streams, I could make a form submission, I could re-render it, but why do you need to have server-side rendering for such a small thing where you don't like have any additional backend related logic? So sometimes you don't need like turbo streams, you can just use stimulus. Another simple example, like this is something you would usually do only with JavaScript, or copy to clipboard. And talking about stimulus, you don't have to write your own stimulus controllers a lot. There are some very nice libraries. I really love stimulus components. Then that offers you like a lot of stimulus components that you can just copy in your application and use out of the box. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Then there is Better Stimulus, a website by Julian Rubish that gives you good practices of how to use stimulus. And then there is stimulus use that gives you behaviors that are not included in stimulus by default, like close window if you click outside of this window. And in some cases, you even don't need stimulus, you don't need any JavaScript, you can just use native HTML elements. For example, for a dropdown, you can use the HTML details tag. It's good enough for many cases. Or this doesn't have to be like a div above another div. You can just use the HTML progress element. Talking of Hotwire, we have like three main parts: turbo drives, frames, and streams. So for turbo drive, I've seen applications that disable turbo drive completely. I've seen applications that disable turbo drive on like links or forms. And 99% of cases, you do not need to disable turbo drive. So some time ago, you need to disable turbo, like make it data turbo false for device. You don't need to do it anymore for device. Device works out of the box with the Hotwire. Sometimes when you do need to disable turbo drive, if you are redirecting to an external link, like if you're doing omni-auth, you need to set data turbo false. In terms of turbo frames and turbo streams, first implement the feature with server-side, like with full page reloads, and then you can add some reactivity using frames and streams. So it's something you add on top of your page. If you're building like a page where you can have like a table with filters, with search, first make it work without turbo frames and streams, and then if you need more reactivity, you can add them. Don't add them too early. Talking about dark mode, there's a lot of fun talk on Twitter about like, oh, I'm not going to use a website that doesn't have dark mode or so on. But in reality, if you want to maintain both light mode and dark mode, it is going to be a big burden on your development team. It is an additional thing that you need to check for every component of your application. And my suggestion would be not to build a separate dark mode. I know that some people who have like astigmatism, they would need dark mode to properly view the web, but people who really need dark mode can use browser plugins that can make any website dark mode. And you can build your website in any design that you want it to look. You can build dark mode out of the box, you can build light mode, whatever. Also, I like the idea of being more visual than text. So you see, like here we have the icons. They're easier to navigate than the text. And if you want to teach your user long-term to use your application, it's easier for the user to learn long-term by icons. It'll be like intuitive for them to use icons. So if you can use an icon instead of a text for a button, try to use the icon. Also, a simple thing, sometimes I can know that the application was built with Ruby on Rails if I just go /404. And it's like a small detail that can make your application look more expansive, look richer, build a nice error pages like this one. Also, using meta tags. So don't forget to set dynamic titles for your application. So in the application layout file, you will have a title by default, but you can override it for different pages. It will be useful for browser tabs. So I see like 3 different tabs, and I see what I have open in each tab, because each of them has a different HTML title tag. And also for social sharing. So if you're trying to share a page in your application on LinkedIn, you will want to have a preview with a title, subtitle, and image, but not just a link. This would be much more clickable. Also, something I don't really like, previously we had tables in scaffolds. So like you create a new Ruby on Rails application, you create a list of clients, and boom, you have a wonderful table. It works like Excel, wonderful. Now it looks like a list, and sometimes I have the feeling that I would want to go back to tables. Well, thank you. Well, you can do it. You can create custom scaffold templates, so you can put it in the lib library inside your application and override the scaffold generators so that they generate HTML based on like what your application should look like. Also, there are like lots of component libraries. If 5 years ago there were none, now there's like Polaris that is using Shopify UI design, and there are like a few other libraries. One even is created and used by the UK government. So these are all Vue component libraries, and these are libraries of components that you can like start using out of the box in your application and worry less about writing the CSS. Okay, so we had a look at like quite a lot of small different front-end things, front-end gotchas that we need to pay attention on. So first of all, start with the layout design and consider making a responsive layout. Then page component, flash styling, active link tool, buttons, CSS abstractions, when to use Hotwire, how to use stimulus, a few other small things, and component libraries. And yeah, friends, if you want to learn how to build all the components that we just talked about, if you want to learn how to build responsive tailwind in Ruby on Rails, then feel free to visit superrails.com. I have a whole series of videos how to build and how to learn tailwind and apply it to Ruby on Rails applications. Also, right now I'm working on a new series how to build mobile applications with Ruby on Rails, Turbo Native, and Strada. So feel free to watch it. And yeah, a small announcement for myself in the end. I've been working on Super Rails for like 4 years now, and it's all been free. And now I started creating a few like members-only episodes. So consider subscribing. Yeah, thank you.